In UFO terminology, a close encounter is defined as an event in which a person witnesses an unidentified flying object. The level of interaction between the witness and UFO determines where the event falls on the following scale. A close encounter of the first kind is the visual sighting of an unidentified flying object. A close encounter of the second kind is where the event leaves behind some type of physical evidence. This could include photographs, radioactivity, radar contacts, and scorched ground or vegetation. Close encounters of the third kind are where physical beings are witnessed. And most terrifying of all, close encounters of the fourth kind are where witnesses are abducted by the UFO or its occupants. In today's episode, we look into the bizarre and frightening case of Travis Walton. Early one morning in November of 1975, a group of 7 men were working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near the city of Snowflake, Arizona. The crew had been hired to clear timber in the area, and after a long, hard day of cutting down trees and clearing bushes, Crew Chief Mike Rogers decided to call it a day. The crew packed up their equipment, and all 7 men piled into Mike's truck for the ride back into town. As Mike was driving through a heavily wooded area of the forest, he noticed a light up ahead in the sky shining through the trees. Not thinking much of it at the time, Mike continued driving, and as he got closer, the intensity of the light grew stronger and had a strange glow about it. At this point, all the men had seen the light and began speculating as to what it may be. Some thought it may be a helicopter, while others suggested it may be a forest fire. Despite being exhausted from working all day, the men decided to drive down a side access road to get a closer look. As they pulled into a clearing, what they saw shocked and amazed them. Hovering above the treetops just yards in front of them was a disc-shaped craft. The craft was totally silent and not moving. They estimated the size to be between 75 to 100 feet across, with lights all around the edges and lit panels around the bottom of the craft. The group sat there in stunned silence when 22-year-old Travis Walton got out of the truck and cautiously began walking towards it. He approached the craft slowly until he was directly underneath it, the whole time staring up at it in amazement. As Travis approached the craft, it began to slowly rotate and a low buzzing noise began to emanate from it. Mike Rogers began yelling at Travis to get back to the truck, and soon all 6 men were screaming at him to get back. As Travis turned his head to look back at them, a bolt of light shot out of the craft, striking Travis, throwing his body 20 feet through the air, landing him somewhere in the bushes at the edge of the clearing. In a frightened state of panic, convinced that Travis was dead, Mike Rogers immediately threw the truck into gear and drove with great speed and reckless abandon back down the dirt access road, with some of the other men screaming, some of them crying, and the rest in a state of shock and confusion. When they reached the main road, Mike stopped the truck. Some of the men pleaded with him to keep on going, but Mike said no. They had to go back and look for Travis. Mike turned the truck around and headed back to the clearing. When they got back to the clearing, the UFO was gone and there was no sign of Travis. They searched the area for hours, calling his name and looking deep into the woods. Travis Walton was gone. Unsure what to do, the group drove back into town and called the sheriff. The group reported the bizarre story to Deputy Ellison and Sheriff Gillespie. Although skeptical, they assembled a search party, and the following morning, the sheriff had Mike Rogers and his crew lead them back to the area where Travis was hit by the beam of light. The search went on for several days using tracking dogs, four-wheel drive vehicles, and even helicopters. Not a trace of Travis Walton could be found. With no clue where Travis Walton could be or what may have happened to him, police began to shift the focus of their investigation towards Mike Rogers and his crew. Suspecting that Mike and his crew may have had something to do with Travis's disappearance, Sheriff Gillespie subjected each of the 6 men to a lie detector test. When the results came in, 5 of the men were shown to be telling the truth, with the result of the 6th being inconclusive. The test was conducted by a reputable polygraph examiner, and he stated that there was no chance that the men were being untruthful. With foul play being ruled out, this raises the question, what happened to Travis Walton? After being hit by the beam of light, Travis Walton found himself lying by the side of an unfamiliar road. He was cold, confused, and thirsty. The last thing he remembered was being struck by the light from the UFO. His body was aching and he was feeling lightheaded, but he managed to get himself up and began walking down the road. He soon came upon a gas station just outside of Heber, Arizona. From a payphone, Travis called his brother Dwayne for help. Dwayne was shocked to hear from Travis. "Where have you been?" he asked. "People have been looking for you for days." Travis didn't realize that he had been missing for 5 days. He thought his encounter with the UFO had only happened hours ago. Dwayne picked up Travis at the gas station and took him to the hospital. Travis was diagnosed with dehydration and was malnourished due to 5 days without food. Otherwise, he was in good health and was released the following day. By this time, the media had caught wind of the incident and the story had become a worldwide sensation. Television networks, newspaper reporters, and radio stations from across the country were clamoring for interviews with Mike Rogers, his crew, and especially with Travis Walton. The police were also interested in talking with Travis, but with no apparent crime committed, they merely took his statement and left it at that. In the ensuing days, amidst a slew of media requests from around the world, reporters and news trucks were constantly showing up at his home. Frustrated, Travis decided to accept an offer from the National Enquirer. In exchange for exclusive rights to Travis's story, the Enquirer offered to put Travis and his family up at a quiet ranch resort and pay him an undisclosed amount of cash. The Enquirer had Travis perform 2 separate polygraph examinations, which he both passed, and also had him undergo psychotherapy sessions to help him remember what happened to him during those 5 days. Even before he started his psychotherapy sessions, Travis had begun to remember bits and pieces of what had happened to him during those 5 days. Travis states that after being hit by the light, he remembers waking up to what he thought was a hospital room. His vision was still a bit blurry, but he could see that he was laying in bed and that he could see people walking around him. He assumed that he was injured during the incident and his friends had taken him to the hospital. After going in and out of consciousness, Travis awoke to someone bending over him. As he lifted his head, the other person turned and looked towards him. It took a moment to register, but Travis realized that this wasn't a person at all. He became terrified and began lashing out at the being. He pushed himself up off the table and stood up. The room was tiny. His head was touching the ceiling. He noticed two other beings in the room. He frantically tried to find his way out of the room, but again, he soon lost consciousness. The next memory he had was waking up on that road near the gas station. To this day, all 7 men have not changed their stories, despite being ridiculed and having their sanity questioned. All the men have taken multiple polygraph tests, which confirm that they are, or at least believe that they are, telling the truth. Could this actually be a real case of alien abduction? We know of at least 7 people who know the truth. What do you think?